The reliable one. Why the person everyone depends on has no one. Carl Jung observed that the very mask we perfect, in order to be needed, can become the wall that nothing warm is ever able to climb over. Long before Jung wrote a single page of psychology, Goethe put the ache plainly in Faust, "Two souls, alas, dwell within my breast." And Jung read that line as a young man and never fully let it go, because he saw in his own consulting room, year after year, that the soul everyone could see and lean on was almost never the same soul as the one doing the leaning. The presentable one answers the phone, shows up early, remembers everyone's birthday, carries the weight without complaint, and the other one, the tired one, the one with needs of its own, waits quietly in a back room that nobody has been shown to. Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The very qualities that make a person indispensable to everyone else are the same qualities that make that person invisible to everyone else." Reliability becomes a kind of camouflage, so complete that even the reliable one starts to forget there was ever a face underneath it. And that is not a character flaw. That is one of the oldest and most exact mechanisms Jung ever described. A mask worn so long and so well that it stops being worn and starts being mistaken for the skin. Think of how many rooms you have walked into this year already fitted with that mask in place before you even said hello. How many times the greeting "How are you" was answered before the question had even finished leaving the other person's mouth. That speed is not politeness. It is armor moving on its own, trained so thoroughly that it no longer waits for you to decide whether to wear it. Here is where you get to be honest for just a moment. No one is listening in. So say this quietly to yourself, and mean it. I admit that being needed has become the only way I know how to belong. I see that the mask marked capable has grown so close to my skin that I have forgotten it can be taken off. I am willing to let one person see me set the weight down without rushing to pick it back up. I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I admit that being needed has become the only way I know how to belong. I see that the mask marked capable has grown so close to my skin that I have forgotten it can be taken off. I am willing to let one person see me set the weight down without rushing to pick it back up. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I admit that being needed has become the only way I know how to belong. I see that the mask marked capable has grown so close to my skin that I have forgotten it can be taken off. I am willing to let one person see me set the weight down without rushing to pick it back up. I make the unconscious conscious. If this kind of honesty is useful to you, consider staying close by subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching has a way of finding you again. And before we go any further, if something in what I just said landed somewhere quiet in you, type the two words "face it" in the comments below. Let it be a small private seal between you and yourself. No one else needs to know what it means. The first key is that reliability itself was never the problem. Jung made a careful distinction most people never learn. The mask he called the persona is not a lie. It is a necessary negotiation between the private self and the public world. An actor's word borrowed from ancient theatre for the face you present, so society knows how to deal with you. A surgeon needs a steady persona in the operating room. A parent needs a calm one at the school gate. A teacher needs an unshaken one in front of 30 restless children, and the reliable one built a persona too, the one who handles it, the one you can call at 2 in the morning, and there is nothing shameful in that mask. Jung was clear, we cannot live in society without one. Civilization depends on 1,000 such useful masks, meeting politely across counters and dinner tables every day. What turns a useful mask into a private prison is identification. The moment the person stops wearing the role and starts believing they are only the role, the moment there is no longer a face underneath, only the mask, all the way down. Picture an ordinary Tuesday for the reliable one. A co-worker's project collapses, and she stays late unasked. Her mother calls confused about a bill, and she solves it in 4 calm minutes. Her partner comes home irritable, and she absorbs it without a ripple showing. Her son calls needing money. He is too proud to request, and she finds a way to offer it that lets him keep his pride. By 9 at night, she has been 4 different steady hands to 4 different people, and not one has thought to ask what happened in her day, not from unkindness, but because she has never given them a version of herself that needed asking about. This is why the reliable one rarely says, "Actually, I am struggling too." The words are not forbidden. It is that somewhere along the way, she lost the sense there was a separate self, even permitted to struggle. The title swallowed the person. And once a title swallows a person whole, the world only ever meets the title. It thanks the coat, leans its whole weight against the coat, and never wonders what the coat is holding up. So understand, gently, you are not broken for being dependable. Dependability was never the flaw. You have simply mistaken the coat for the body, and worn it so long, through so many winters of being needed, that you forgot there was ever a season for taking it off. And here is the quiet mercy in that fact. A coat, unlike a wound, can always be set down without damaging what is underneath it. I am allowed to remove the coat and still be someone. The second key is that this particular mask was usually built for a reason that once made perfect sense. Jung, describing his own boyhood in memories, dreams, reflections, spoke of living as 2 personalities inside one body. No one. The schoolboy who did his lessons and was awkward and ordinary. And no 2. Older, wiser, connected to something vast and timeless. And Jung noticed that no one was the persona built for daily survival among other children, while no 2 was the deeper current that the outer world was never shown. Most reliable people carry a version of this same split. Somewhere back in childhood, a small person noticed that being needed was safer than being needy. Perhaps a parent was overwhelmed. Perhaps a household ran on scarcity of attention. Perhaps praise only ever arrived after the dishes were done or the younger sibling was minded. And a quiet contract was signed without a single word spoken. I will be the one who does not need anything. And in exchange, I will be the one everyone can count on. Imagine a boy of 9 whose mother works 2 jobs and whose father is simply absent from the house in every way that matters. This boy learns quickly that a scraped knee reported at dinner earns a tired sigh. But a scraped knee that is quietly bandaged alone and never mentioned earns something better, a kind of relieved approval. So he stops mentioning the knee, and then he stops mentioning most things. He becomes the boy who is fine, the boy who packs his own lunch, the boy the teacher trusts to walk the younger kids home, the boy whose report card never needs checking because it is always already good. No one sits him down and asks him to become this. He simply notices what earns warmth and what earns nothing. And a 9-year-old will build an entire personality out of that noticing without ever calling it a strategy. He will simply call it being good, and no one around him will think to call it anything else either. That contract worked. It earned love, or something that could be mistaken for love, and so it was kept, year after year, promotion after promotion, crisis after crisis, until it was no longer a strategy a child once used to stay safe. It had become, in Jung's phrase from a 1928 essay, an artificial personality wearing all the medals that the real one earned, but never a punishment for. Jung wrote that such a mask can be worn without punishment for quite some time, and that phrase is worth sitting with. Without punishment, meaning the bill does not come due immediately. Look at how it plays out now, 30 years later, when a friend finally asks this same grown man how he is really doing. Watch the small flicker of panic that crosses his face before the automatic, "I'm good, you," arrives. That flicker is the 9-year-old, still standing guard, still certain that the honest answer costs more than it gives. The contract never expired. It only followed him into every room he has walked into since. Into job interviews where he undersells his own exhaustion. Into marriages where he apologizes for needing rest. Into friendships where he is always the one who checks in first. The bill comes due later, quietly, usually alone, usually at an hour when the phone that always rang for everyone else stays silent for the one who built it. And by then, the contract feels less like a choice made long ago and more like simply the shape of who he is, which is exactly how Jung said a persona becomes most dangerous, not when it is worn, but when it is forgotten that it was ever put on. I did not choose this contract as a child so that it would rule me as an adult. The third key is where the title of this whole teaching actually comes true. So let us walk through an ordinary day the way Jung might have asked a patient to walk through it, hour by hour, without judgment, only noticing. At 7, the reliable one wakes already scanning for what needs handling. At 8, a co-worker's problem becomes theirs because saying, "not today," has never once left their mouth. At 10, a manager quietly hands over the hardest client because everyone already knows who can be trusted with difficulty. At noon, a sibling calls in tears and 40 minutes disappear into patient listening. At 2, a neighbor's car will not start, and somehow by 2:30, the reliable one is standing in a parking lot with cables that were not theirs to bring. At 3, a friend cancels plans, and the reliable one says, of course, "don't worry about it," and means it, because minimizing their own disappointment no longer registers as a choice. At 6, they get home to no task at all. And something strange happens, a flatness, because the identity running since 7 in the morning has nothing left to attach to, and rather than rest in that quiet, they reach for one more small usefulness, because stillness, without a role inside it, feels less like peace and more like disappearance. Notice, at no point did anyone ask how they were carrying all of it, not from cruelty. But because the mask was built so well, it never signaled there was a load to ask about. Now imagine a man everyone at the family gathering calls the steady one. He arrives early to move the tables. He is the one his mother calls about the furnace, the one his brother texts at midnight about money, the one quietly handed the eulogy because everyone trusts he will find the words even in grief. And at the gathering itself, surrounded by 20 people who love him, he stands near the kitchen doorway with a drink he is not really drinking, and not one person crosses the room to ask what his year has actually been like. Later, he will call this simply being the strong one in a family. But notice the shape of it: 20 people, one room, and a silence built entirely out of competence. Years of training everyone there, wordlessly, that he is a resource and not a person with a season of his own. Pause for a moment and hold your own week up against that clock face. Count, honestly, how many hours were spent tending someone else's crisis compared to how many someone spent tending yours. You do not need the exact number, only the shape of the answer. Because the shape is the diagnosis, the reliable one has no one, not because they are unloved, but because they have spent years teaching everyone around them, without meaning to, that they do not need to be checked on. Every time you absorbed a crisis, without naming your own cost, the lesson learned was, this one can carry anything, and people learn that lesson well. Then they simply stop checking, not from neglect, but from trust, which is its own strange, backhanded cruelty. Jung's phrase for this whole shape is identification with the persona, the professor who can no longer take off the gown even at his own dinner table, the reliable one who cannot take off competence even at their own kitchen table. And here is the quiet cruelty of it. The dependence is not false. The tragedy is that it only ever flows one direction, toward the mask, never back toward the person wearing it, because that person has become so hard to locate. Every exchange in that day was real, none of it performance in the shallow sense, and that is exactly what makes the pattern so hard to see from inside it. It does not feel like a mask. It feels like simply being a good person, but a mask worn in genuine kindness is still a mask, and a room full of people who love you can still, somehow, add up to an evening with no one in it for you. I let people see the load, not only the hands that carry it. The fourth key is that the mask does not only hide you from others, it slowly hides you from yourself. This is the part Jung considered the more dangerous half of identification, because a mask worn toward the world can at least be noticed by an outside eye. Some friend, some partner, some sharp-eyed observer might eventually say, You seem tired. But a mask worn inward, worn against your own awareness of your own state, goes undetected far longer. Because there is no outside eye watching the inside of your own mind, ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you knew, in your body, that you were tired? Not the vague administrative knowledge that you have not slept enough, the kind you note the way you note the weather, but the felt sense of your own limit, the kind that stops you mid-motion and says no further today. The reliable one often cannot answer that question quickly, because the internal instrument that used to report, "I am overwhelmed, I am frightened, I am lonely," was quietly decommissioned long ago. It was not useful to the role, so it stopped sending signals. Or rather, it still sends them, but they arrive translated into something more acceptable. Restlessness instead of grief, irritability instead of exhaustion, a sudden urge to clean the whole kitchen at 11 at night instead of the plain thought, "I wish someone would ask about me." A headache that shows up every Sunday evening instead of the plain thought, "I do not want to face another week of being everyone's answer." Jung would say, the feeling has not vanished. It has simply gone where all unwelcomed material goes, underground, into the part of the psyche that keeps its own accounts, whether or not the conscious mind agrees to look at them. And those accounts do not forgive a debt simply because it goes unexamined. They only compound quietly, the way interest compounds on a loan nobody remembers signing. Consider how this shows up in the smallest of moments. A woman sits in traffic after a long day of being needed by everyone, and finds herself strangely near tears over nothing at all, a delayed light, a slow driver ahead of her, and she cannot understand why something so small has cracked something so large in her. But it was never about the traffic light. The traffic light simply arrived at the one moment all day when no one was watching and nothing was required of her. And into that small gap, everything she had translated all day finally found a door. This is not weakness. This is the psyche doing exactly what Jung said it always does, finding some way, sooner or later, to speak the truth it has been denied permission to speak directly. This is not a call to abandon your reliability. Jung never asked anyone to burn down a persona that took years to build. He asked only that we stop mistaking the persona for the whole of who we are. The coat is useful in winter. The trouble starts only when you forget you are wearing a coat at all. And forget, too, that a coat can be loosened at the collar even while it is still doing its job. I let myself feel the tiredness before it has to disguise itself. Breathe with me for just a moment before we go further. If this teaching is doing something in you, let subscribing be the small thread that keeps us connected, so the next one finds you exactly when you need it. The fifth key is the deepest one, and it unfolds in 4 movements. So take your time with each, because this is the key the whole title has been quietly pointing toward since the first sentence. First, consider what happens the moment the reliable one actually tries to ask for help. Imagine a woman 3 separate families quietly depend on. Her aging mother who calls every evening. Her own children who assume dinner will simply appear. A sister going through a divorce who needs someone steady at midnight. At work, she is the person new hires are sent to when something breaks. And in 9 years, she has never failed to answer that call. One evening, after a genuinely hard week, her body aching, her sleep thin, she finally tells a close friend, "I think I need some help this month." And the friend, without unkindness, looks startled, laughs a little, says, "Oh, but you always handle everything so well," and changes the subject. And she sits there holding an honest offering just handed back to her unopened. This is not betrayal. It is what happens when a persona has been perfected. The people around it have built their whole picture of you out of its material, and when you offer them different evidence, they do not know where to file it. So the reliable one learns that asking does not reliably produce help, it produces confusion, and she ends up comforting the friend for having been startled, which is perhaps the strangest twist of all. So the asking stops, and the isolation that follows is mistaken by everyone, including her, for independence, when it is closer to what Jung would call an exile from one's own need. A banishment nobody enforced on purpose and nobody notices from the outside. Second, consider the harder truth underneath that story. The mask is not only kept up by other people's expectations, it is kept up just as strongly from the inside, by something in the psyche that finds a strange safety in never being fully known, because to be known is to be knowable, and to be knowable is to be disappointing, refusable, ordinary in a way competence never has to be, and the mask, whatever its cost, has never once been refused. People do not reject competence, they lean on it gratefully, so a part of the psyche quietly strikes a bargain, that being leaned on, even at the cost of being lonely, is safer than being loved for something as unfinished as an actual self. This is the trade Jung spent decades helping people renegotiate, not because it was made in bad faith, but because it was made so early, in a childhood bedroom or a chaotic kitchen table, that the person who made it never got to vote on it as an adult. And here is the strange arithmetic: the more skillfully the mask performs, the higher the cost of ever removing it. Because a mask that fails badly gets noticed and forgiven, but a mask that succeeds perfectly gets depended on so completely its owner feels there is no safe moment left to set it down. Imagine telling a room of people who have leaned on you for a decade that you are tired. It can feel like pulling a support beam out from under a house everyone is still standing inside of. So the beam stays, groaning quietly, holding up a structure never meant to rest on one person alone. Third, there is a particular tiredness that belongs only to the reliable one, worth naming plainly. It is the tiredness of never being surprised by your own strength. Other people get to discover, now and then, that they were braver than they expected, and that discovery feeds them. But the reliable one already knows exactly how strong they are. They proved it years ago and keep reproving it every week, so there is no discovery left, only maintenance. And maintenance does not nourish the way discovery does. This is part of why success can feel strangely flat for the one everyone depends on, not because the achievements are hollow, but because achievement without witness starts to feel like shouting in a room with no one in it. Imagine climbing the same mountain every week, so skillfully no one ever notices there was a mountain at all. They only see you arrive already at the top, looking as though you always lived there, and after enough years, even you forget there was ever a climb. Only the appearance of belonging at the summit, effortless, permanent, and quietly unbearable. Fourth, and this is the turn, because it has been easy to picture someone else while listening, a co-worker, a sibling, a friend everyone leans on, so let it land here instead. If you are the one people call first, if your phone fills with need before it ever fills with care, if you cannot quite remember the last time someone asked how you were actually doing, this key is not describing a type out there. It is describing a pattern you may be living inside right now. Pause for a moment and count. On one hand, the people who ask you for something in an average week, and on the other, the people who ask about you, not your schedule, not your advice, you. And notice which hand fills first. Notice how quickly you found a reason it is fine that the second hand is nearly empty. That reason is the mask speaking on its own behalf. Jung's whole method begins exactly here, not with fixing, only with seeing clearly. He wrote that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate, meaning the loneliness you did not choose, is not random misfortune. It is the outer shape of an inner arrangement never once looked at in daylight. And the good news is real. An arrangement made unconsciously can be revisited consciously. You did not fail at connection. You built a very good mask for a very real reason, at a time when you had far fewer choices than you have now, and masks, unlike character, can be adjusted without the whole structure of you coming down. I am willing to be known, not only relied upon. The sixth key is the practical one, the one you can actually carry out of this teaching and into tonight. Jung called this kind of work a mask census, and it is far simpler than it sounds. You do not need a new philosophy of yourself. You only need one clear look at where the mask has been doing all the work alone. So pause for a moment and pick one real relationship in your life. someone who calls on you often, someone who has come to depend on the steady version of you without ever quite meeting the rest. And ask yourself plainly, does this person know one true difficulty I am currently facing? Not a difficulty already solved and reported on with a calm and finished voice. A live one still open and unresolved. If the honest answer is no, you have found exactly where the persona has been standing in for you, uncomplained about and unrelieved. Now imagine an ordinary man at an ordinary Sunday dinner, the one his whole family calls the Rock. He has fixed his brother's car, covered his mother's rent twice this year, and driven 4 hours the week his niece was born. At the table someone asks, almost as a formality, "How are you doing?" And for 30 years the answer has been fine, busy, can't complain. But this Sunday he sets his fork down and says, "Actually, work has been harder than I've let on, and I haven't been sleeping well." And then he does the hardest part. He does not soften it with a joke. He does not immediately ask his brother a question to hand the room back to safer ground. He simply lets the sentence sit there, uncollected, for 3 or 4 uncomfortable seconds. His mother blinks. His brother looks up from his plate, and something small and real passes through the room. Not a rescue, not a solution, only recognition. And that recognition is the entire point. The reliable one is not asking to be carried, only to be seen carrying. Notice, too, that nothing collapsed when he said it. The family did not stop depending on him. The world did not end. The roof stayed on the house. This is worth remembering the next time the old fear rises, that honesty will cost you the very reliability that has earned you your place. It will not. It will only, slowly, earn you something reliability alone never could. Being known as well as being useful. This is not a single grand confession that fixes everything in one sitting. It is a practice, a door propped open a little wider each week, one true unfinished sentence to one steady person, then another the following week, perhaps to someone else, until slowly the census itself becomes the new habit, not counting who needs you, but counting who knows you. The mask does not need to be burned down for any of this. It only needs one hinge left unlocked, so that on the nights when the weight is real, there is a door in reach that opens from the inside. I offer one true sentence to one steady person this week. Here is the whole picture. The mask was never the enemy. Only forgetting you were wearing one was the danger. The reliable one was built early, and for good reasons, that once kept you safe. Identification with that role, not the role itself, is what hollowed out the years since. An ordinary day spent being needed by everyone can still end in a silence that no one thinks to fill. Because you trained the world, gently and without meaning to, never to ask. The tiredness you stopped feeling did not disappear. It only went underground and started speaking in quieter, stranger languages. And the loneliness at the center of it all is not a life sentence. It is only, in Jung's own words, what happens outside when something inward has never been made conscious. Which means, the moment you look directly at it, something in the arrangement is already free to change. All 6 of these were never 6 separate keys. They were 6 turns of the same single key. The recognition that you are allowed to be a person, not only a position. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. And if the person everyone depends on is reading this or hearing it, quietly, alone, in the 1 hour of the day no one else has claimed, let this be the true sentence finally spoken back to you. You were never meant to be reliable all the way down to the floor of yourself. So tonight, just once, put the coat on the hook and see who is still standing there underneath it, still worth calling on.